Hey, Econ Kids. This is your Section 5 review. This one deals with money, types of money, where money comes from, how banks can make more money. And I would say if I was a AP person and I wanted to put something on a test, I would put something on like a T chart, definitely on the test this time. So as you look at this, you got lots of stuff in here that is probably just nice to know. All this stuff on savings, investment, spending, nice to know. Um, Adding stuff in here for a balanced budget, budget deficit, just nice to know. Um, you can review all these things on your own about what is wealth or what is a liability. I just can't imagine a ton of that being on the test. Um, the tasks of financial systems and what they're trying to do obviously provide liquidity and reduce transaction costs. Can't imagine that really being on a test either. Um, if there's something in here in terms of definitions, you could obviously have all these definitions just out if you needed to know the definition of a loan or a bond or something like that, but I can't imagine that either. Anything on this page, probably nothing. If you look at money overall, like what is money and what is the role of money, money definitely a medium of exchange, store of value, unit of account. We talked about all that stuff. I can't imagine that being on the test. I don't know how it would really be put on the test, but again, you could have all the different definitions if you want. Commodity money, commodity backed money, fiat money. Again, fiat money is what we use now. Could that be on the test? Maybe, but I would doubt it. Measuring the money supply. Now, this is usually a good, I don't want to say trick question, but usually, on a multiple choice question, if they got something on M1 and then they ask you what is M2, because M1 is part of M2, like sometimes that's a tricky one. But again, I don't know if you can have the definitions out. Why would they ask just what is part of M1 and M2? Time value of money is not on the test anymore. Banking and money creation. This is where I think you could see something on the test. If you're looking at the financial intermediaries or liabilities and assets and reserve requirements and reserve ratios, all that stuff, I think, if I was an AP person, that's what I would put on the test. I would put an aggregate supply, aggregate demand question on there with something like a recession maybe, and then make you use fiscal or monetary policy to fix it using the multiplier. That would be one question for sure. And my second question would be, here's a T-chart. How much money can the bank loan out? How much was the reserve requirement? All those questions. I would definitely have examples of those in front of you, definitions of those, so that you knew what exactly all that stuff is. Remember, when you look at a bank, if they only have to require so much in reserves, like 10% of reserves or something like that, that means they can loan all the rest out. And if they loan all the rest out and that gets redeposited, then they only have to keep a fraction of that and then loan the rest out again. So as you look at that, that money multiplier from a bank is going to be a pretty big deal in terms of money creation. Remember, it's your excess reserves divided by the reserve requirement gives you how much you'll be able to multiply the money by. So if you look at part C over there where it says, so if the reserve requirement is 10%, 1 over 0.1 is 10. So then if the Fed adds $100, it feels like $1,000. So as that happens, that is something that for sure could be on the test. The Federal Reserve history and those kinds of things, I can't imagine that being on the test at all. There's just no real reason for it. You could probably Google it. I don't, the Board of Governors, like sometimes there'd be a question like multiple choice on that. The 12 regional banks and the Bank of New York and all that jazz. I just don't really see them asking any of those questions. I don't think they would ask you anything about the financial crisis and that kind of stuff either. Monetary policy is in here. So when you're dealing with the monetary policy, part of that is the reserve requirement, remember? But as you're looking at monetary policy, probably the most important one is going to be that open market operations. So reserve requirements, the discount rate, open market operations are all things they can do. Open market operations is the one that's used most often. So we could change the reserve requirement. Right now, I think the Fed dropped it straight to 0. So banks don't have to keep any money in reserve at all. They can loan every single thing out, which is absolutely insane to me, but we are in like COVID crazy, so who knows? Um, as that federal funds, reserve ratio, that's part of it. The discount rate, remember that's the rate that the Fed charges, like the banks. The federal funds rates, what banks borrow other banks. So when you look at this, that's like a secondary tool. Like people don't use it very often. They just they gotta make sure they cover all of their liabilities before the day is done. This open market operations, remember that market operations one is when the Fed's going to do something by buying or selling these treasury bills or bills or whatever you want to call them, T bills, sometimes they're called that. As you look at it, if they buy the bonds, it makes the economy bigger. Sell the bonds makes the economy smaller, right? So if you look at the left side, to control a recession, what's going to happen? That central bank is going to buy bonds from the bank, right? So they're going to buy the bonds, make it bigger, and then hopefully there's a lot of money out there, and then individuals and companies are going to get that money, spend it, go get a loan, low interest rate loan out there. If you look on the right side, their inflation's crazy. Oh no, what do we do? Central bank is going to sell the bonds to the bank, take the money out of the system. There's not as much money, interest rates come up. There you go. Open market operations. Watch Jacob Clifford in a YouTube video. Here, example of open market operations. Remember, treasury bills, those go on the asset side. It does not affect your liability side. That is sometimes a trick question. By doing that, sometimes kids get confused and they try to say, oh, well, that's money coming into my bank, so it must be a liability. That's not true. It's not a deposit to you. Instead, it's an asset that you can keep and hang on to. It's just the different form that it's taking. It's a bill or a bond now rather than actual cash on hand. Then the money market. The money market, remember, is just the opportunity cost of holding that money. We're trying to reduce those transaction costs. So when you think about holding money, those short-term interest rates are a big deal. You don't have to draw a graph, so I don't know what they would do for you here, but your demand for money, basically that change in the rate's going to move along your money demand curve. So when interest rates are low, you're going to go down the curve. When interest rates are high, you're going to come up the curve, and people are going to demand more or less money as a result. Can the money demand curve shift? Yes, it can. When people decide to hold, like something happens and you hold more money, makes money more desirable, and all of a sudden that money demand curve is going to shift out to the right. If you look, something happens, makes it maybe less desirable, shift it to the left. As you look at price level, higher price level shifts it to the right, lower price level shifts it to the left. Changes in real GDP, changes in technology, changes in institutions. If the banks are falling apart or nobody has any money, sometimes people take all their money out and go bury it in their backyard like Miss Cotney. So as you look at it, if you grow up in the UP, you probably have coffee cans full of money buried in your yard someplace. Equilibrium, interest rates. When we talk about that money supply curve, like how much money the Fed puts in there, that is going to be perfectly vertical, right? And then where it crossed that money demand curve, that's where our interest rate is going to be. As you watch these things move around, you can just click on those. It's not too difficult to see like what happens when there's less money in the market or more money in the market. We're just gonna, wherever that's gonna hit our money demand curve, that's where our interest rate will be. If interest rates go down, bond prices go up. When interest rates go up, bond prices go down. It makes sense. Maybe go review that concept. There's a sheet in one of your packets that kind of describes why that happens. And last but not least, we have the market from loanable funds. I would have all these graphs kind of graphed out in front of me, and if they ask me a question on it, I would be able to at least look at that graph to say, yes, this is what's going on, right? When you start looking at why banks borrow or why businesses want to borrow, you can see what happens in those loanable funds, how much they demand. You can see when people save money, that's your supply of loanable funds. So when you look at this together, like how much people want to borrow versus how many people want to save, that's going to give us our interest rate here and the quantity of loanable funds. Graph that out, maybe the reasons why, have that on a piece of paper, be ready to roll with that. What shifts those demand for loanable funds? If people think, hey, this is a good business opportunity, or um, the government's doing stuff right now that would encourage business, that's going to make that happen. If the government starts borrowing, that's okay, but it can lead to that negative of crowding out, which means interest rates are now too high, and it'll keep other businesses from wanting to get in because the government's the one who's taking up all the money. That could certainly happen, especially now when you're starting to see like crazy stuff in terms of businesses going out of business and the government's just going to borrow money to be able to offset some of those things. Shifts the supply of loanable funds. It's change in private behavior or capital inflow that can move supply out to the right. Um, it could move supply to the left depending on what's happening. And that's going to give us some inflation in interest rates. You can look at those. This is looking at the two models together. And just remember, in the long run, really, be careful that long run changes in the money supply don't really affect that interest rate too much. The equilibrium, interest rate is the rate that matches where supply and demand for loanable funds are right now. So look at all that stuff, review it. There's things in there, a couple graphs maybe that are, we're new in this unit. And definitely review those bank T charts, because I think that if I was them on the AP, I would put that on there for sure. Good luck.